bad.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo, also known as Ricky Brands, and a great episode for you today. A guest I've been trying to get on for quite a bit, but our schedules just haven't worked out until now. Erin Marie Olszewski is my guest today. She's been interviewed on tons of shows like Tucker Carlson, Bigtree's The Highwire, Watching the Hawks with Tyrell Ventura. So I'm sure some of you guys might be familiar with her story. She's a whistleblower, New York nurse whistleblower, originally from Florida, went to New York to find out what she was being told, and what was really going on was drastically different. So she tells her story, her background, how she ended up in New York, all that stuff, her recordings. We talk about her documentary, which is called Perspectives on the Pandemic, the Undercover Epicenter Nurse. And she also has a book called Undercover Epicenter Nurse, How Fraud, Negligence, and Greed Led to Unnecessary Deaths at Elmhurst Hospital. So amazing story, important story. Tell people about this podcast or other interviews she has done. Remember to rate, review the show, subscribe to the show, share the show, all that type of stuff. The show is open source. Post it, share wherever you want. I know some of you guys have been doing that on some of the alternative platforms. Also, if you guys want to make clips of my episodes, if there's a part of the conversation, a part of the podcast that you find super interesting or you think would be a great little clip to get somebody to go back and watch the whole episode, please do that. And I have a playlist on my YouTube channel for clips. So send it to me and I'll add it to that playlist. I'm also on Rockfin. I have a solo show called Ricky Rants on Rockfin. It's a premium show. So if you're a Rockfin subscriber or member, it's like a Netflix for alternative media. Richard Grove is there with his show Grand Theft World, Sam Tripoli, Last American Vagabond, Vanessa Beeley. So many great shows on there, Jason Burmis. And a lot of them have free content and then the premium content. You can make a free account, check out all the free stuff, and then you can also make a premium account if you like the website, if you like the content creators that are on there, and you can get access to all our work, all our premium work. So check it out. All those links will be in the show description. I also have a merch store, rippleeffectpodcastmerch.com. I also have a PayPal account, Patreon account. If you guys want to support the show, my Patreon account, I do once a month, I do a Patreon podcast with my Patreon supporters. It's called Ricky Rants with Fans, and we do a show together, and I release it as a episode. So another great reason to support the show on Patreon. The show can also be found on BitChute, Odyssey, Float, and I think eventually I'll put all my free content, all my Ripple Effect podcast episodes also on Rockfin for free, just to have it basically as many places as possible, just in case I get censored on any platform. And I'm on a bunch of social media platforms like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff. I also have a personal Facebook page. If you want to send me a friend request, just let me know that you're a fan of the show and we can connect. Last but not least, the Ripple Effect Podcast is also on Fringe.fm. It's a 24/7 alternative media radio station. You can get the app and listen to it anytime you want. Tons of great shows on there. Grimerica, Charlie Robinson, myself. I'm on 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday nights. And also from time to time, we will be streaming the Union of the Unwanted on Fringe.fm. So you can get the app or you can just go to the website, Fringe.fm, and listen to it anytime you want. Joe, who is the creator and founder of Fringe.fm, was just on the last Ripple Effect podcast, so check that out. And also, if you haven't checked out the Union of the Unwanted, please do. Every other Monday, it's live streamed on our YouTube channel, but you can also subscribe to us on our RSS feed and get all the episodes that way. So please do. The Union of the Unwanted is a giant collaboration, giant community of people who are going against the grain, asking questions, content creators, researchers, and thinkers. So a really, really fun and important podcast. I think we've really built a awesome community where people are supporting each other and helping each other, which we need if we do want to fight back. So thanks again, guys. Remember to subscribe to my shows, rate my shows, review my shows, all that stuff. Support the show if you can. If you can't, no big deal. Please just share, tell people about it. That goes a long way. And I will talk to you guys in the next one. Peace. I've been trying to get you on for like months, but I know you're busy. I see you're active on social media and constant traveling and stuff. Good. Thanks.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's all right. I'm just kind of joking with you.
How are you?
Good. Let me see. Just get your volume up a little bit. Yeah, it's funny because your story was obviously relevant when you were a whistleblower, and now it's almost become relevant again because of all the Cuomo stuff and everybody kind of focusing on New York. This guy that was called a hero and gets these rewards, and people are talking about him being the next president. And now it's almost like everybody's like, you know what, we have to sacrifice this dude. We can't defend him anymore. And to make it seem like he was a rogue politician who was doing things for political purposes only and not to help people. I think they're trying to distance themselves from it. But let's get into your backstory, because I think your whole story is interesting. I think it's all fascinating, and I think it helps paint the picture of who you are as a person and why you had the courage to come out and speak. So for people who aren't familiar with your story and where you grew up, you know, your military background, all that stuff, and how you became a nurse, can you give a description of all that?
Sure. So I grew up in Wisconsin, a very small town, and I joined the military when I was 17. I've always been kind of American, you know, our whole family is very patriotic, and I wanted to do something that would make a difference. So I kind of coerced my mother into co-signing when I was 17. She didn't want to. And this was January of 2001. So September 11th hadn't happened yet. So I ended up in basic training in July of 2001. And, a month later, 2 months later, September 11th happened. So I did go to war. I was one of the first ones in Iraq in 2003. Got back home in like 2004, transferred down to Florida, where I live now, and worked in anti-terrorism for a little while, got out of the military, and went to nursing school. So ultimately, I always wanted to be a nurse since I was a little girl. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. I've been a nurse for almost 10 years. And I don't know, I was kind of living my life here. I have three kids, 3 boys. And, last year, almost a year ago, we started seeing this pandemic happen. And in Florida, our hospital, we weren't overwhelmed. I was working in the emergency room out in the tent, actually. We would have a few people come through, but nothing crazy, consistently waiting for the wave that never came. So I took a travel position to go up to New York, and, during the height of the pandemic. And, that's kind of where my story started, I guess. Heading into another war zone, which was a war zone for its own reasons, not because of COVID. It was because of, a lot of gross negligence, medical mismanagement, malpractice. So it's kind of my life in a nutshell right now.
Yeah. So when you went to New York, you obviously went there. I'm assuming, like many people, you were kind of confused on how serious this was or what was going on. You went there because obviously anybody who joins the military probably has the courage to go to a hot spot, like they were calling it, and trying to help people. And so when you first went there, how long did it take before you started realizing like things weren't what they seem?
So it was similar going into like the war zone in Iraq. We flew into Kuwait. We were ready. We were in mop gear, ready for, firefights, whatever was going to come at us. So it was a very similar, eerie feeling being on a plane flying into New York, because like we didn't know what to expect. I sure as heck didn't know what to expect. But maybe that's just kind of my personality to just go into like war zones. I don't know. I guess strange. But my very first red flag is when I got off the plane and it was just kind of waiting around. So we didn't get right to work. I was sitting around for 3 days in a 4-star hotel. Started talking to the nurses that had been there, before me. And, some of these nurses were sitting around for like 18, 20 days with nothing to do. That was weird to me because I thought that this is like, this mass hysteria. They need nurses so bad, but there's like thousands of nurses sitting around. So it was kind of a lottery how they picked us. So I ended up getting assigned to Elmhurst Hospital. And so I was sitting for 3 days and then got put into the hospital. And when I got there, there was enough staff. So it was not understaffed. I never had more than 2 patients, 3 patients at a time, which is average for ICU. But it was just the carelessness of taking care of these patients. They were essentially kind of just like left to die. People gave up. Nurses, doctors didn't want to go into their rooms. So you have patients on ventilators that can't speak for themselves. They're essentially in a medically induced coma, have no idea what's going on. No families allowed in the rooms. And the hospitals are liability free. So it became kind of the perfect storm for negligence. They were putting extensions on the IVs, the tubing. So the IVs were sitting outside of the rooms. So without even having to even assess a patient hands-on, without even going into the rooms, they're just switching the medications. Some of my patients that I had, had feces up their backs for probably 2 weeks. That made me sick to my stomach. The very first shift, we worked 12-hour shifts. I got back to my hotel room, and I remember I totally broke down. Hyperventilating on the floor, on my knees, just like crying, because this is not what I signed up for as a nurse. To allow these patients to be treated that way, and it was like so many people were okay with it, was not okay with me. And I got on a Zoom call. I just reached out to a lot of my nursing friends, good people I could trust, and just asked them if they would just go on a Zoom call with me. I just needed to talk to somebody. And one of my friends is a nurse practitioner. Her name's Sarah. She ended up, I guess, essentially kind of becoming my proxy. And she did a live video, Facebook video the next day, hey, like just kind of letting people know, hey, one of my friends is working in New York. She said this is happening, and it ended up going really viral, like really, really viral. And the amount of hate mail and death threats, and just she didn't expect it to go viral, but it did. So I watched that happen. I'm like, you know what? And this was like a few more days after working. I'm like, no one's gonna believe me. They don't believe her. The amount of hate, like I need to do something kind of drastic, or people will think that I'm lying, And so I ended up contacting an attorney in New York, and that I knew, and let him know what was going on. And we decided to, he got me some spy glasses, and I started going undercover and recording it while I was working. So terrifying, but it's if I could do it over, I probably would have done it better. And I don't regret it. I think it's necessary. I think that we would have never been believed otherwise. None of the administration wanted to hear what I had to say. They threatened, firing you if you spoke out. You were considered a difficult nurse. But ultimately, my job ended in New York because I was fired, because I was too outspoken. But they didn't realize at the time that I had been undercover, the majority of the time that I spent there. So.
Yeah, and some of that recording, because I found out about you through the documentary, let me get the title right, Perspective of the Pandemic. And that's where I first saw you. And at the time, I think things were going viral because I've had Mickey Willis on also, who did the pandemic documentary. And so many of these people who, Del Bigtree, all these people that were, really outspoken, and Dr. Scott Jensen, all these people were going viral because people understood that something wasn't making sense. Mm-hmm. So when your story comes out, or the pandemic documentary comes out, or we had Judy Mikovich on my other show, The Union of Unwanted, she comes out and talks, that finally made sense of something that didn't make sense. So people start sharing it like wildfire. And your documentary, the pandemic documentary, I had people sending it to me who weren't conspiracy theorists at all, but because they were so used to kind of go on with their everyday lives. And while Big Pharma was influencing what was going on TV and policies and politicians, nobody cared because it didn't affect them personally. Mm-hmm. And now they had time on their hands. Mm-hmm. They had their lives affected directly. So people became much more aware of all these issues with Big Pharma's influence and all this political nonsense that was going on. I mean, some of the stuff like Cuomo making hydroxychloroquine illegal to prescribe. I mean, that should be between a doctor and a patient. I mean, you shouldn't be giving medical advice. You shouldn't be. I mean, people are getting kicked off of YouTube for saying vitamin C and vitamin D are good for you, and yet a politician can decide that this drug isn't going to be used anymore. And I say anymore because there's a generic drug that was used for a long time, and of course there's some evidence of some side effects. Just like every drug you can give to somebody can possibly give them side effects. So it's not, that's not uncommon. But they demonized it. I think mostly for political reasons, and because they didn't want to promote a generic cheap drug. They wanted to promote and push the vaccine and that whole agenda. But so how did the documentary come about? And also, what were some of for people who haven't seen it, it's hard to find. I believe it's still on, you find copies of it on BitChute and Odyssey and Library, but I don't believe it's on YouTube anymore. Similar to Mickey Willis's. It is? Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah, it's just hard to search. I have it on my Linktree. My Linktree is at Nurse Erin. But yeah, it's unsearchable, but it's there.
So how did that come about, and what are some of the things that you caught on video and you recorded that obviously exposed what was going on there?
So I didn't know what I would do with my undercover work. I just knew that for people that don't know my story and are just learning what was happening, I'll just kind of run down what was so bad in New York. When people went to the emergency room, they didn't necessarily have to have COVID, but they would be admitted, right? They didn't utilize the comfort chip. So the comfort chip was there for people that didn't have COVID, other things. It was never utilized. They were told to stand down. That's criminal in itself, because the reason that they wanted to admit all these patients is, one, to keep the agenda going. Two, there was financial incentive to admit COVID patients. So if you admitted a COVID patient or a COVID rule out, so they wouldn't even need to necessarily have a positive test, they could just say, we think it might be COVID, get them a test, They had the rapid test that they could have used. They didn't. They used the longer test, which would be 5 to 10 day turnaround. In the meantime, these patients were getting admitted. $13,000 paycheck for the hospital. Cuomo banned the hydroxychloroquine. We used it in Florida successfully. Our governor, Ron DeSantis, did not ban it. Makes a huge difference in the treatment of patients. I mean, the hydroxychloroquine and zinc protocol worked. I saw it work. Politicians make lousy doctors. I say that all the time. Cuomo should have never gotten involved in between the doctor-patient relationship. So not only was that banned, but also the, any alternative treatments like the high dose IV vitamin C. Dr. Chang was using that successfully in Asia. Every single alternative treatment was banned, but their number one go-to was a ventilator. So back in March, oh my gosh, it's so crazy. It's almost been it's been a year. Like I feel like we've been living in this twilight zone for so long that you just forget. So in March of 2020, Cuomo ordered 30,000 ventilators, demanded them from the president, and he got them. So, he was, I think maybe he didn't really expect that. And so when he had the ventilators, he felt the need to probably use them to be right, even though I got there early April. The ventilators had killed 100% of the patients by the time I got to the hospital. 100% death rate on ventilators. Every single patient died. So they knew that the ventilators were killing patients. They didn't care. They wanted to use them. That was our go-to protocol. That's what every single patient ended up on, regardless if they have COVID or not, because another price tag, $39,000 for each patient on a ventilator. So knowing this, I couldn't really comprehend how everybody was just okay with it. And, I have recordings, and it's on the expose of other nurses, not just myself, questioning the doctors. Well, why can't we try this? Why can't we? It doesn't work. We just got to do ventilators. Well, obviously these ventilators aren't working. No one would listen to us. So that was one of the things that we could have done differently, and it was refused, and they knew it. A few other things that would happen is full coded patients. So let's just say your family member is a full code. They want to be saved. They want to be resuscitated if something happens. We were ordered to stand down and not code full code patients. That is gross negligence. That's murder. You can't refuse treatment when that's the patient's will. That's what they wanted to do. I have recorded the things that are on my expose is just like a sliver of what I have. But what I did put on there is a 37-year-old patient that it was the nurses versus the resident doctors, pretty much fighting over his body as he died because they told us to stand down and not code him. It's devastating. Like that kind of stuff is absolutely appalling. Our entire healthcare system is, I don't know. I don't even know how to explain it. I don't want to be a part of it anymore. I'm okay to be cancel cultured out of nursing. I have my license. I'm blacklisted. Fine. Because I want to be able to fix what is happening. So when my expose, or when we decided to take some snippets from what I had recorded so we could kind of warn the public and warn the hospitals that we know what you're doing. And so my attorney connected me with the perspectives of the pandemic crew, Journeyman Pictures, and they did an impromptu interview that I never really expected. I thought we were just going to talk, and we ended up just kind of recording. It was recorded with an iPhone. It was never a big production. It was just, I need to get this word out, or there's going to be a lot more lives being stolen. And so my expose came out in June of 2020, and the pretty much the day or two after it came out, death toll in New York just plummeted. So they knew that I was onto them, and they knew that I had, I guess, kind of been a mole in their hospital to expose them. But they did bad things. Like, this was, in my opinion, this was murder, and they knew it. And so I think, like, the public deserves to know that, and I think that in order to make sure that history never repeats itself, this kind of stuff needs to be exposed, and governors like Cuomo also need to be held accountable. You know, it wasn't just the nursing homes. He made a really bad decision to do what he did, you know, putting COVID positive patients in nursing homes, but he also is responsible for a lot of what happened in the hospitals, because these were all of his executive orders as well. So liability-free hospital, except if a doctor prescribes hydroxychloroquine, they will be held liable, likely lose their medical license. So very corrupt. It's still literally have nightmares about some of the things I saw, and like some of these patients that were essentially kind of discarded and treated as, you know, another statistic. And that's disgusting. You know, these patients have families, they had lives, they didn't discriminate against age. You know, there was 20-year-olds, you know, thrown on ventilators and just kind of pumped with paralytic sedatives until they went into organ failure and ultimately ended up in the freezer trucks. And these people didn't die from COVID. The majority of the patients, I would say 99% of them, died from just pure gross negligence.
Yeah, the ventilator thing was interesting because it was obvious that it was political, and he was just trying to ask for so many that he could make the president look bad and then say, hey, these deaths are on your hands because you're not giving us the equipment we need. But the president, people might not remember this, but because there's so many press conferences, I'm sure some people missed some or tuned out. They were just sick of seeing them. But he had one of the heads of like one of the biggest ventilator companies on a press conference, and he said that the amount of ventilators that they were asking for was like beyond what the biggest hospital in the U.S. would need, running at 100% capacity. So he's like, it was just completely insane how many they were asking for. And then they find that warehouse full of them, and then you find out that, you know, the overuse of ventilators caused a lot of these deaths. So without a doubt, there's blood on his hands. And then all the, like, I mean, the CNN interviews with Cuomo and his brother were so ridiculous. I mean, they would make me so bad because I'm like, these guys are just joking around, like, no big deal. I mean, they're both lying and liars. And so yeah, I mean, your film and you know, was so important. Any update on your, speaking of iPhones, you said it was recorded on iPhone, your screen was broken, I think, in the film. You ever get that fixed?
That's so funny. You know what? That is the most funny thing. It was like when I got the go to come to go to New York, I literally had to pack in 2 days and get on a plane. So on my way to the airport, my phone, I had left it, you know, because it was a rush. I mean, it was like, you know, go time. We ran it over by car, like just by chance. I'm like, all that. So everything is closed in New York. Like so I had that phone. I'm surprised that it was even working the entire time. Yeah, I finally got a new one. Is right here. And yeah, good. But yeah, no, that was, people were laughing about that. Like, get this girl a new phone. Well, there's a story behind that, but yeah, I mean, nothing was open, you know, and even ordering, they were on like a huge back order because, you know, everything closed down. So funny. That is funny. Yeah, it's better now.
So you did have other people in the community that were upset about what was going on and somewhat outspoken. I mean, was there what was the pushback? Did you feel like were you afraid of speaking out because of possibly losing your job, or were you just more concerned about getting the truth out and getting this information out there?
I knew I was going to lose my job. Like I went into this knowing like, okay, this is going to change my life. I am a single mother. So I knew the risk, like I knew what I was getting myself into, but what's a life worth? What's thousands of lives worth? It's just, I mean, it's not even a question. It's just doing the right thing.
So were you surprised when some people weren't as upset as you and they were just going along with it? I mean, the thing about traveling nurses and you guys, I actually have a friend who he's local. I live right outside of Springfield, Massachusetts, this town, Ludlow, this little Polish and Portuguese community. It's all Polish and Portuguese people. So I see a lot of skis. A lot of people I grew up with were skis. But and he's a traveling nurse now. He's a single guy. He's just like, why not? You make tons of money. You can travel. I mean, but that was a part of it, right? Like, I'm sure some people were motivated by like, hey, I don't want to fuck this up. I'm making good money. You were probably surprised when you got there that it wasn't as busy and it wasn't the craziness that everybody expected. I mean, some people might be familiar. There's so many examples of us being lied to, but one of them was also that New York hospital footage that was actually a Italian hospital from CBS News, and then they, people are like, oh, well, they're just using stock footage. I'm like, that's fine, but let the people watching know that it's stock footage. Don't just talk about how busy these hospitals are, then show footage that's not it, because obviously people are going to connect those dots and you're misleading people. So was that a big part of it? Do you think that kind of quieted down what was going on a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a lot of money. I've never made $10,000 a week in my life. That's hush money. These doctors were making up to $50,000 a week. So that's why I said, what's a life worth? I was supposed to be there an additional 8 weeks. That would have been an additional $80,000 if I would have kept my mouth shut. It's hush money. And every nurse agreed with every single nurse on my bus, because we would bus there and back. We stayed in Times Square at the Marriott Marquis in Times Square. So every morning we would bus, take a bus to Queens. And that's where we all talked about the hell that was happening and how absolutely insane it was. And everybody agreed. I recorded all these conversations. I mean, this is 5 weeks worth of there and back. And I was not alone in my thoughts. Everybody agreed. The whole frontline heroes, hero status, the parades, that is all a psyop. That's to get these people thinking that they're doing good when I knew we weren't, like, and everybody did, but they loved it, and it was all kind of orchestrated. Like it was like this show. And I knew it. I don't like to be called a hero. I'm doing my job. I don't want the accolades. I went into nursing to do nursing, just like I went into the military to serve my country. Like I don't need accolades. That's what I signed up to do. But so people loved that hero status. And so when my expose came out, the greatest amount of pushback I got was from people on the front lines, and they were mad because I stole their hero status. That was one of most of my hate messages were that, like, you took that away from us. And like, I didn't take anything away. I just exposed what's really going on, and I'm not saying that there's a lot of good nurses and doctors. I'm not saying that, but if you know, as a healthcare provider, if there's something wrong and unethical happening, it is our duty as mandatory reporters to say something. It is. Like, that's our job. That is our job, to advocate for the health and safety of our patients, number one. And how backwards is it that when you do, you get fired and cancel cultured for that?
Yeah, that's the thing that was making me really upset. And I've said this tons of times on this show, that typically we're accepting of the fact that doctors disagree with one another. You can go to a doctor, get an opinion, then you go get a second opinion, then you go get a third opinion. During this whole lockdown, it was like they decided what truth was, and anybody who said anything against the mainstream narrative was pseudoscience, was debunked, was this, was that. And it's like, wait, if they have a PhD, or if they work at a hospital and they have experience and they know how the system works, why isn't their opinion as valid now as it would be before 2020? Like, to me, it was insanity, and it was so obvious what was going on. I've heard you in past interviews. I might have been with Zach from Red Pill 78. I remember you were saying, like, this is one of the greatest deceptions or hoaxes ever in human history. And I 100% agree with you, because nothing, no
Scandal.
hoax, no scandal, nothing has ever taken over the world the way this has reshaped the world, has affected everybody so personally. I know people who are so afraid of traveling. I have a neighbor who I was just talking to yesterday, and he was like, I just came back from Florida because my wife has family in Boca. So we went down there. I say we left communist China, Massachusetts, to go to America, because Florida actually feels like America. And we went down there, and it was so nice. It was like, people were enjoying themselves. People felt somewhat normal. If you ever go to the Duck in Boca, tell them you're a friend of mine. That's my wife's family. But people were just like, they were so over it. It felt like post 2020. And then all of a sudden you come back to Massachusetts, and it's like the public shaming of, like, if you don't wear a mask, people are going to say something. And don't get me wrong, there was like one or two times where, I saw people on the beach with, a mask, a couple, old couple. And I'm just like, okay, these people, there's crazy people everywhere. Apparently you can't filter them all out, but it's not to the extent of Massachusetts. You come here and there's like almost social pressure, cultural pressure to just follow the guidelines, even though everybody knows this doesn't make sense and it's ridiculous, and we're, it's over. Actually, it's never even really started, but it's definitely over if it did start. And yet people in Massachusetts are just so brainwashed, and it shows the power of the television, the news, and all this stuff, and fear. Because in Massachusetts, our governor is saying, don't get together with your family on the holidays. Be scared. It's not over. Do this, do that. And everybody's just following suit. Where in Florida, DeSantis is saying every job is an essential job. I'm not going to prevent anybody from living their lives and trying to make a living. And people kind of, they kind of reflect what he's saying. So it's wild how reality is all based on, what the media is telling you. In Massachusetts during the summer, I was having barbecues. People were coming over. I had people over the whole lockdown. I have kids, and I have a now 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. And God bless you for having 3 boys, because that's crazy. I mean, it's not easy. And but they're just so energetic. It's nuts. And one of my cousins have 3 boys, and it's just like I could sit there and just watch them all day, because they're fighting, then they're laughing with one another, then they're fighting, and they're jumping on things. It's hilarious. But it's hilarious because it's not me having to deal with it. But it just we in Massachusetts, like it's all this perception, and it showed how, like, the media, like, even though for the longest time, people were getting their news on social media, and the mainstream media really wasn't even relevant anymore. People were getting their news from Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, but now they're all, I mean, they have been, but now it's more obvious than ever that they're all in bed together. And now, like, you go on YouTube, and I just said this on my last podcast, and it's so true. Like, we would go on YouTube to find people like yourself who are giving a different perspective. We would go on YouTube to search different journalists, different researchers, different perspectives. And now, and to get away from mainstream media. And now you go on YouTube, and all you see is ABC, CBS, CNN, all this stuff. It's like, wait, no, I'm here because I want a alternative. If I wanted these, I could just watch TV. I could watch the news. But to me, I have a friend of mine, his wife's a nurse in Springfield, Massachusetts, and she said something similar to what you said in a past interview, where you were like scared the first couple days until you kind of realized what was going on. And that's how she was. She was like, she wasn't panicking because of what actually was happening. She was panicking because of what they told her was going to happen.
Right.
And then when it didn't happen, she's like, okay, now what? Like, where's the onslaught of patients that we aren't going to handle? Where's all, the uproar? Where's all the sick people that are going to die? And we can't control it. Like, it was crazy. And then it became very obvious that, like I said before, it became political, where the mask argument was about, it was about what political team you're on. I'm enforcing masks not because there's actual science to it, but because my political team says, hey, you should be wearing them, so I'm going to enforce that. So it did you see any of that, like, just through your experience, that some people's positions, even other employees at the hospital, their positions on what was going on was politically motivated and it wasn't motivated by science or morally what was right or wrong?
So I'm a conservative. I'm pretty open about that. This is the thing, like when I walk into a hospital, I don't see left or right, white or black, like a patient is a patient, end of story. But within the healthcare system, in our healthcare system and environment has been very toxic for decades. I mean, it's broken. It's been broken for a really long time. Outside of the pandemic, even on like a really good day, it's a bad day. Like, imagine like patients, family members being in their rooms on a good day, and people watching this will probably be able to resonate that, maybe you have a family member sitting with them. You're like, hey, where's the nurse? She hasn't been in here for 4 hours. I mean, it's like that. You have to go find them. Hey, they don't have any water. So kick the family out, and now it's, even worse. But it was very political. You cannot be a conservative in healthcare and say anything. In the break rooms, they would have, President Trump would be, he was speaking pretty much every day. They would be, poking at him, making fun of him. He's doing it all wrong. And I had to sit and just be quiet and listen to that, thinking to myself, he's not the problem. You guys are the problem, because everybody's just kind of going along with this, they were getting, we got food delivered every day, it was a really bad environment, and it's been that way for a really long time. It's very political, and that is a big no-no in healthcare. Why would we make patient care political? That needs to stop immediately, and I don't know how we're going to get through this, because like you said, everything's censored. Conservative voices are censored right now. We're pushing back really hard. There's no science behind these masks. Like if I'm going to be around a coronavirus patient, which at one point I wasn't even wearing an N95 in there because I'm like, this is bullshit. There's more to this. But you have to be professionally fitted. The proper mask, professionally fitted. You can't wear it, more. You're not supposed to wear it more than an hour at a time. Then you're supposed to switch it. We were wearing our N95s for like a week, and then they were washing them. I mean, it was just, there was no science behind anything whatsoever.
Well, that's a very important point, because one thing I didn't know that you only wore them or you're supposed to only wear them for an hour. But one thing I've always kind of told people, I'm like, I mean, obviously you're breathing in carbon dioxide. Del Bigtree did a nice little experiment where he was, he had one of those meters, and he was even with the face shield, which you think because there's some distance between your face and the shield that it wouldn't really have much of a negative effect. But even with that, and any idiot who's willing to wear that, but even with that, you're breathing in more carbon dioxide than you would without it, and it goes up drastically as you keep it on. So the thing about a hospital, I would tell people, I'm like, listen, even if you believe that masks work, even though it says on the box that like it doesn't stop the spread of coronaviruses, I'm like, people at the hospital, and correct me if I'm wrong, like you said, you replace them quite often. You go into surgery, once you get out, you take it off, and you have boxes of them everywhere. You can always get a new one. most people, okay, have the masks in their pocket with their keys or in their purse with their keys, their phones. I mean, phones are pretty damn dirty when you really think about it. Like you never wash them. You're constantly touching them, and you're touching everything else. So your mask is touching your phone. Your mask is in your car because you don't want to go somewhere and forget a mask and then, not be able to go into a store. So they're just constantly picking up germs, and then you're putting them on your face. Kids are playing sports with them, and they're sweating.
It's dangerous.
Yeah, without a doubt. Like the idea that like even if there was any studies that showed that it could stop the prevent of things, it's not the same way that the average person is using a mask. It's not the same type of mask. It's not, we're not reusing them as often or getting a new one. We're constantly reusing the same masks. So it's just not the same situation. So even if you believe it could do something, it could. And it also could make you breathe in carbon dioxide, which is a waste gas. You breathe it out for a reason. I mean, when you exercise, the reason why you breathe heavy is because you need more oxygen, not less of it. And and two, that mask is constantly picking up germs, and you're putting it right on your face. So if you're worried about picking up germs, then what we're doing with masks are ridiculous, and again, Dr. Fauci lied about it, regardless what people believe. Oh, well, he didn't want, he didn't want all the masks to sell out or whatnot. And I'm like, wait, so if we could make that many ventilators, you don't think we could make that many masks? And
we had more than enough. I mean, they were storing them. I mean, they were hiding them. I mean, there was rooms full of them. So that's a lie too. Maybe for a short period of time, there wasn't enough PPE. That was quickly solved. Done deal. But it's the virtue signaling. And also people don't know, like you said, it's hard to search for. You can't even search for my expose. It's hard to search for the truth. So, those elderly people on the beach, they're probably really terrified because no one's got to them yet to explain to them that, hey, you don't have to live in fear. And so that's why I continuously am speaking out and doing interviews and trying to get the truth to as many people as possible, because it's not fair to have so many people being lied to. And it's not fair to have unscientific mandates, that can cause harm. And it's very disappointing to see so many other healthcare people in the healthcare industry kind of going along with it and ignoring it. Like you've seen it with people have probably seen it with the vaccine. They literally had campaigns throughout the United States. I've seen the emails coming from administration, and this is coming from the top. This is coming from, at this point, the Biden campaign. They are campaigning so everybody gets this vaccine for a virus with a 99.9% survival rate for most people. But they're having healthcare providers take their photos. Is that strange? That's strange to me. I would, just not even knowing anything, I would question it and being that's strange. Why are they doing that? They would have scripts, actual scripts for people to record videos and say, there is a risk to this. This is experimental. There are people dying from this, and you don't see those statistics on the news. You don't see that little ticker on the, with the coronavirus deaths, which were actually from, medical mismanagement and neglect. You don't see that, they bury that. So they're targeting the minority populations with this. They did so also in the hospitals. So look around at all the hospitals that were really, really hard hit. And you'll notice that the majority were Black and brown patients, Medicare, Medicaid patients, low income hospitals. In Texas, you'll see that all the hospitals really hard hit were right on the borders, same as California. If you look at Elmhurst Hospital, it serves minority populations. That's who they're going after right now. They're going after minority populations and sadly the elderly as well.
Well, and there was some research about people who are vitamin D deficient, and
Mhm.
who's vitamin D deficient, usually African American, Latin American, because especially if you live in New England where I live, and
Mhm.
you get sun like 2 months out of the year. But it's yeah, so it's obvious that it seems like they're pushing other agendas. I mean, when you look at like Event 201, and
Mhm.
you look at all these things, then you look at like the World Economic Forum, and Schwab's book, the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Great Reset, and you listen to their podcasts, and then you look at the history of Bill and Melinda Gates. It's so obvious that there's so many other agendas
Mhm.
happening and being pushed, and even things like the virus coming out of the Wuhan lab, that initially was like a conspiracy theorist and a conspiracy theory, and then Trump was crazy for saying that, and now it's like publicly
Mhm.
accepted. You look at like saying things like what you said, that 99% of people will survive and be okay. If you said this a year ago, you're a crazy person, you're banned off every platform. Today it's publicly accepted.
Mhm.
So it's like, why was that not acceptable a year ago? Why is it now? And why were they banning people who were just saying things that happen to be true now? And so people have to ask these questions, and people, I mean, it's just like, how many coincidences do you need before you realize they're not coincidences anymore? They're, to me, it's like anybody who still is drinking the Kool-Aid, it's like, what is
How?
wrong with you?
Yeah. Like, do you remember Dr. Cameron Kyle Siddell? He was so he's either, I think he was an ICU or ER doctor out of New York. So this was like a year ago in March. He was working with coronavirus patients, and he did a video, and I reposted this on my Facebook. I'm banned from there pretty much forever now. But he said, we're doing it wrong. The ventilators are killing these patients. It's the wrong treatment. We need to reassess. So I started looking into it. I'm like, this guy is, he's a doctor. He's working. I'm still sitting in Florida, like twiddling my thumbs, wondering where all these, the rush is. Remember the 2 weeks we were waiting. And so I posted, I looked more into it. I'm like, yeah, the ventilators aren't working. And so I posted this on my Facebook page, and I got so many death threats, like to the point, yes, like very, very, very bad response. And now we are a year later, and voila, ventilators were the wrong treatment. So that's why science is never settled. But in our culture, in the way that we are right now, anything that they say is settled until it's not, until you have enough proof. That's not how science works, ever. Like, you should always be able to have constructive discussions on new, like, things that are, evolving in real time, but we're hushed. Gosh forbid you say the ventilators aren't working, even though, another doctor is also saying the same thing. He also got some really awful pushback, to the point where he left working in the hospital at that point, because he's like, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. And I understand now, having been to New York after he left, what he went through, because I don't want to be a part of it either, and so here we are, trying to, wake people up to this, because ultimately people need to save themselves at this point. There's enough information out there, but they have to be able to search for it, and kind of, be critical thinkers on their own to do this, to, I don't know, push through this nightmare that we're living in right now.
That's why the censorship issue is so near and dear to my heart, and it's so important, because if somebody listens to this conversation, they're like, you know what, let me search some of these doctors they're referring to, or some of this research, or these documentaries, and then they go online, and what they'll find is your video being debunked, pandemic being debunked. I mean, if you watch, and I'll actually listen to these debunking videos, and if you actually break down what they're debunking, it's so silly. It's like
personal attacks.
Yeah, it's personal attacks. They'll go, she's an anti-vaxxer. And it's like they find like the most little detail. Like, she called, Erin called somebody Bob, but everybody knows he's referred to Bobby. Like debunked, she's wrong. She's a liar. And I'm like, this is so, I'm like, people just see the headline like, this nurse has been debunked, this has been debunked, that doctor's been debunked, and nobody actually looks into it. And when you actually look into it, the things that they're, even the fact checkers, same thing. I've heard Tim Pool talk about it on his show about how silly, like when they fact check something and they say, oh, this was incorrect. And it's like, they'll find some little detail that they can interpret it in a different way and say, oh, see, the whole thing is a lie because of this little detail. And I just don't, unfortunately, I think most people just read the headlines. And I remember when the pandemic documentary went around, like within the same day that it went viral, there's already debunking videos. And I'm like, wait, we're talking about science here. And we're talking about something that's kind of unknown. How could you already research everything Dr. Judy Mikovits said and figure out it was true or not true, and then put together this whole video? I'm like, something's really, weird about this whole thing. So, I mean, people have to be wary of that too. I mean, it's sad that people do need to go to like BitChute and Odyssey and Library and other alternative platforms, and Ben Swan has one too, isc.media, and they go to these alternative platforms to actually find alternative perspectives and opinions. And YouTube and Google were places you could do that at one point. You could go down some rabbit holes. You can find some interesting just opinions on things. And now it's just force-fed mainstream media. So now it's like you have the people that you'll never reach, that they're defending a side or another side because they fall for the political theater nonsense. Then you get the people who might be skeptical of what's going on and then attempt to do research, and all they find is research that says or that backs the mainstream narrative, and everything else has been debunked. So even if there's people who are honestly skeptical, it's hard to for them to actually find anything because they might not be aware of these alternative platforms. So yeah, we live in a crazy time where I feel like podcasts, content creators, these type of conversations are more important than ever to try to reach people. I mean, luckily, my show's 99% people listen to it. They don't watch it. So being shadow banned on YouTube or whatever, it doesn't really affect me too much. So the nice thing about podcasts, it hasn't been touched too much in regards to censorship. But it'll probably be just a matter of time before they find a way of shadow banning people or censoring people on podcasts, audio podcasts. But it's yeah, we live in a wild world. I know a nurse locally who's also talked about how a lot of, at least this is true for local hospitals, when they start talking about mandating the vaccine, which, like you said, you're a guinea pig. There is no long-term research because it's a new vaccine. It's new technology, a RNA vaccine. A lot of people are leaving, and a lot of people are leaving hospitals. A lot of nurses are like, screw this. If you're going to mandate a vaccine, we're out of here. And they're going to other states. Some are going to Connecticut because I live close to the Connecticut border. Is that something you're also hearing from people in the industry?
Yeah, people reach out to me all the time. Like, I don't know what to do. I think that it's unethical to mandate an experimental biologic. I think it's unethical to mandate any medical procedure at all. And that's where where are the My Body, My Choice crew at? This is the whole narrative thing. Like, you can't have it just one way. You have to, we're, our own people. We should be able to make that decision. And it's costing a lot of healthcare providers their jobs because they're not going to, they're not going to do it. And I commend them for it, because one thing that they'll learn very quickly is that when they start doing this, people are going to leave the profession. A lot of nurses are leaving. I get tons of emails and messages from nurses that have left. So when enough nurses leave, they won't be able to run the show anymore. Nurses run the hospitals. Without us, it's over. They cannot function. Doctors can't function without nurses. We're the backbone of the industry. And there's enough nurses right now that are sick of it. and they are leaving. And I think that it's great. I think that's how we can take a stand and say, you know, no more, because a lot of the times people won't be inclined to really do anything until it affects them. And so I think now we're at that point where they're like, okay, I've seen enough BS with what was happening with the patients, but now you're going to come after me? I don't think so. So when I first came out with everything, I was a very lone ranger for quite some time. It was a very lonely, difficult, scary road. Now I am surrounded with allies from all over the world. And so it's clear that, you know, at least my profession, and I think people in general, are waking up to the narrative, and they're not complying. And that is how we will win this, to stop complying and start pushing back and start cancel culturing them, and, you know, creating our own, you know, free world. You know what I mean? Like, it's sad. It's sad where we are right now, but I think that it's not completely broken yet. So, yeah. Oh,
yeah, I was muted. Sorry.
yeah.
I agree with you. To be optimistic, I think that a lot of people who weren't aware of these issues are now aware of many of these issues. Like people who weren't skeptical about vaccines. My kids are unvaccinated. I've been, you know, in the kind of anti-big pharma community for a long time. You know, since the beginning of the show, I mean, that's one of the topics I would hit on a lot. I had Dr. Brzezinski on, and doctor who was curing people a cancer with anti-neoplastones, and he has a really heart-wrenching story. But, you know, tons of just doctors and people who were going against the mainstream, what the mainstream was calling medicine, which is just chemicals, you know, and symptom management. But to me, like, I could foresee this battle, and people just didn't care that much. You know, it's like, yeah, whatever, you know, and now they're becoming much more. I mean, when we would talk about in the alternative media, we would talk about Bill Gates and all that, those type of things, and those are things that for a while was just like, oh, that's the conspiracy theorist community is discussing these things, but, you know, there's not anything really there. And now people are like, okay, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah.
Like I'm starting to become much more open-minded to the fact that there's a greater agenda being pushed. I mean, even the Bill Gates, if you listen to what he says, it's so silly the way he tries to justify. Like, it doesn't even make any sense. Like, in one interview, he'll talk about the need to lower population. In another interview, he'll be talking about having to give everybody vaccines to make everybody healthier and to prevent people from dying. I'm like, I guess you could combine these two agendas and you could kill people off with this vaccine. That's, you know, and you saw like the oral polio vaccine, how, you know, that was actually it was a contributor to the polio outbreak, and you see story like this, and, you know, you look at Bigtree, who was a mainstream guy, was a producer of the doctors, and now, you know, now he's being banned everywhere, and even though his nonprofit organization should get the credit, the mainstream media didn't report on it here in Massachusetts, but we mandated the flu vaccine for all kids going back to school. My kids didn't, one, because they're homeschooled, and two, they have religious exemptions. So I don't know what religion I am, but I'm the anti-vax religion. I'm a Buddhist or something. But it's but his nonprofit organization. So this guy is too dangerous to be on YouTube, but he successfully got rid of the mandate for the flu vaccine for kids in Massachusetts with this ICANN organization. So it's like the same guy that social media is telling you is too dangerous actually just saved your child from having to get a unnecessary vaccine that has nothing to do with COVID, even if you believe the BS. And two, the flu apparently disappeared anyway. So why do you need a flu vaccine?
Yeah. I, you know, this whole thing is definitely a blessing in disguise. You know, it is. We're not alone anymore, because, like, I've known about the whole vaccine racket, Bill Gates, who is neither a doctor nor a scientist, trying to come off as some sort of philanthropist cover up. Like, I'm sorry. I don't know why anyone's heeding his advice. He's obviously, this is like, Big Pharma is very powerful. Big tech is very powerful. We're up against a huge, huge force, but the people are much, we're smart, and when you catch them in their lies, eventually they can't lie their way out of it, and I think we're getting much, much closer to the truth, and creating kind of an army of others who are sick of it as well. So, yeah. But yeah, I mean, one voice can do a lot. Like you were saying with the ICANN and Bigtree, they're amazing. One guy, my expose. I'm just a mom and a nurse, but you just have to be brave in a moment where people need you to be brave. And it's not easy, but it's worth it, in the long run, because ultimately we need to do this for our future generations. Like I do this for my kids and your kids. And like, I never want to leave this earth for them to fight my fight, and so I don't know. We can only do as much as we can do, and kind of just hope and pray that things can improve, and we did enough.
Yeah, I called the show The Ripple Effect because I truly believe in the ripple effect, this idea that we can all make a change, we can all contribute something. You never know what effect you can have on the world. And really, like many of us, the other option is doing nothing, and we can't sleep at night or look in the mirror knowing we're doing nothing. Yeah. It's much as hard as it is to do something, it's much harder to do nothing. And I think that's what motivates many of us. And so, yeah, without a doubt, I see that you're very active now. So was this after the whole New York hospital situation? Were you already kind of involved in the community, or did you get much more involved in kind of, the big pharma, all these other agendas being pushed community prior? Was this kind of a new thing?
Well, like I said, people don't necessarily wake up until it affects them. So my son was injured by a vaccine, one of my middle son, when he was 12 months, so 2013. And I was gaslighted by my pediatrician. No, it can't be that. It was that, because it was immediately after his shot that he, started having adverse reactions, very bad. And so I knew that. I didn't appreciate the fact that she told me that I was crazy, because I was not. I think I was an LPN at the time.
Well, and you're a mom. I mean, people have to understand, when anybody who's ever had kids, they know that, especially when they're little, every single cognitive thing that they learn, every single difference you see in their their language, the crawling, walking. I mean, we pick up on every little thing. So to pretend like you just didn't know or you didn't notice it is so ridiculous.
Well, and that's another thing. I always tell my patients, and this was even before this happened, like, your body more than anybody else. So tell me what's different. What is different that, because so you can't see everything, not everything is objective. And so, we know our children, I know what I know. And so that's when I started digging. And digging and digging and digging. And then I was pissed, because I'm like, they never taught me this in nursing school. I didn't know that these vaccine manufacturers were liability free. I didn't even know that there was aborted fetal. I didn't know any of this stuff. And so it was that day that I started, I was healing my child. I was still working and I was working 2 jobs, mainstream hospital and a private practice. Couldn't really say anything. I couldn't be outspoken yet. So eventually, I started dabbling a little bit on social media, and kind of found my crew. And then I got brave, a few years later, because I was seeing other kids happening to, and that was like one of those things like, all right, I can't stand by anymore. Like, I'm a nurse. Like, I gotta tell the truth, and, it's not very well accepted in mainstream. A lot of my nurse friends thought I was absolutely crazy. And that's fine, because I think that they're crazy for not researching, and I think that they're crazy for gaslighting parents and, not listening to their patients, so that's where I started. So I've been in like kind of the medical freedom movement for a while. And I was already very awake to big pharma. They spend more on lobbying than oil companies. That should like be a red flag for everybody. Like big oil, the pharmaceutical companies spend more on their lobbyists than the oil companies. Like, that's crazy. So I mean, it's a money making machine. Sick people bring the paychecks, and healthy people don't. So.
And like I tell people, if you're at the gym and I was at the gym this morning, just watch the news for during the commercials. What is it? It's pharmaceutical drug, pharmaceutical drug, pharmaceutical drug. That tells you that pharmaceutical company is paying the salary of the person who's supposed to give you honest news. I mean, people have to understand that their information they're being given is manipulated.
Yeah, I mean, very few countries even allow that. I think like us, New Zealand, maybe another one that allow pharmaceutical companies.
It's just the two. Yeah, us and New Zealand. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that should be illegal. Like that's brainwashing people into thinking that they need things when they don't. But that's our culture right now, and that's who's kind of running the show with this whole COVID as well. The vaccines right now, pharmaceutical companies, they're making billions of dollars, billion with a B, off of this, while small businesses are completely out of business. People don't even know how they fired me. Like I don't. It's just like they want control, and that's how they'll do it. Is to pretty much make people their puppets. Do as I say, or you're canceled. It's just, believe what we have to say or you're canceled. Take this vaccine or, your friends around you are going to think that you're a danger to society. Like they're using fear to manipulate the population, and it's working, sadly.
Yeah, they are. I was telling a story about to you about my neighbor, but I usually go on long rants and lose track of what I was saying, and I think I did that time. My neighbor, to hit on what you're saying, what I was going to mention was that he told me, because he was asking how my travels were to Florida. He's like, oh, I got the vaccine already, and I looked at him like, why? He's like, I want to do some traveling this year too, and I'm afraid that if I don't get it, I might not be able to travel. And I looked at him and I'm like, dude, don't you want to wait till till even if you want to get the vaccine for that purpose, don't you want to wait till like it's the last resort? I'm like, why would you just go ahead? But that's the thing. Like, so many people are just, nobody's asking questions, and the people who are like you said, being censored and being blackballed from everywhere. And the algorithms and the tech companies are so advanced where, like, even if I will share and I've seen you do it too, you share a screenshot of like an article or something, and they'll immediately like flag it, or they'll put a little warning on the bottom, or or click on CDC or whatever it may be, and it's like, wait, I'm not even typing anything out, but they can read the screenshot, the words in the screenshot, and they already know that it's related to COVID or vaccine related. It's like we're fighting a very tough battle, but again, like when you have parents involved who care about their kids, when you have so many parents like yourself who have very similar stories, I just had Susie Olson on. You look at Dr. Brian Hooker, who's been on my show. You look at Brian Festa from the CT Freedom Alliance. I mean, what do you guys all have in common? You're passionate, and a lot of the reasons why you're passionate is because you guys all have similar stories in regards to having vaccine injured children. So when you have people that, I always say, like, it's in our DNA. It's our primitive nature comes out when you think your kids are in danger.
Yeah,
so not
kids. For
yeah,
sure.
exactly. Yeah. You can mess with me, but just don't mess with my kids. It's like I'm pretty calm and collective until it has to do with my kids. Then it's the few times I've lost my, I lose my temper is when it's involving my kids. So these, we're motivated, and I don't see us giving up, and I think we have a great group of people who are honest and are willing to go as far as the fight takes them. And so I'm hopeful. I'm kind of hopeful for the future. I like the fact that people are becoming the vaccine debate has become something that is much more acceptable. People are much more open to the fact that maybe these vaccine companies are pushing a drug on you or something on you that could be harmful. And I mean, I shared an article, I don't know what year it was from, it was 2016 or whenever it was, of when Pfizer had like the biggest fine ever for deceiving about their drugs. And I'm like, these are the same criminals that are now you think are honest and telling you, I'm like, this, they have a history of being sued and for having to rip drugs off the market that were supposedly FDA approved because of harmful effects. And now all of a sudden you think that they really care about you, so it's, we live in a crazy world, but but I'm optimistic. I mean, are you seeing that also with just people becoming much more open to these discussions?
Yeah, well, one thing that I think opened kind of the gate to anti-vaxxers being more accepted is the mask. Because if you don't wear a mask, then you're now an anti-masker. So pro-vax people that don't want to wear masks are like, maybe this is what they did with the anti-vaxxers. They're calling them anti, like, I don't necessarily like, hot dogs, but I'm not an anti-hot dog person. You know what I mean? Like
Robert Kennedy Jr. said something about that. He's like, nobody called me anti-fish because I was trying to get mercury and out of vaccines or whatever when he was fighting the chemical companies. They don't call you. And yet, like, if you try to just say, hey, I just want to make sure these products are safe and effective, all of a sudden you're like, they just pigeonhole you, you're anti-vaxxer.
Yeah, so that whole mask thing opened up a lot of people like, all right, I'm not I mean, go ahead and wear your ineffective mask. Like, that's your choice, right? I'm not, and go ahead and take those vaccines, even though I really don't want you to. I think you should really research, but that's your choice. I mean, go for it. Even if you don't want to research, it is what it is. But I choose not to. It doesn't make me anti. It just makes me, a person that gets to make my own decisions. And if I want to talk about it openly and have a debate, which none of the pro-vax side will have a debate with me. Z-Dog is one. He does a really good job of trying to discredit us and me. But we'll never have an open debate. Why is that? What are they afraid of? The truth? Yes, that's what they're afraid of.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. I mean, that's the thing. I'm with you. I always say, I'm not anti-vax. I'm pro-information, and I'm pro people having the freedoms to do what they want with their own bodies. So to me, my biggest issue with the whole vaccine just conversation is the fact that people are being force-fed one side of the argument and they're not being given any of the other information. So people's opinions are just, I mean, if you control the information, you control the people's opinions. And because your opinion is based off the information you have access to. So to me, it's like, if you actually had access to both sides of the argument, you saw, the Vax documentary, you saw Highwire with Bigtree, you get all these different perspectives, and then you still came to the conclusion that you think the risk of not being vaccinated is worse than the risk of getting vaccinated. I'm completely okay with that. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your life. But what pisses me off is the fact that people are making decisions based on one side of the argument. They're telling you that everything's settled, science is settled. And like you said, I mean, nothing debunks science more than itself. Science is constantly debunking itself. So anytime they say, this is it, we figured it out, well, they've been saying that since the beginning of history. And we're always like, oh, wait, apparently we had it wrong. You know, so it's
like Vioxx. Vioxx is a perfect example of that. They had to yank it off the market because it was killing people. Merck knew it. They knew it. With the studies, but they still put it out anyway, you know, and that's like a perfect example. Like, oh, maybe we shouldn't do this, you know, but yeah.
It also tells you how ridiculous the whole FDA approval thing is. Like people think, I mean, these vaccines are being fast tracked. They're able to skip steps in the process of being FDA approved because we're in a state of emergency or whatever they want to call it. But yet when drug companies have to actually go through all the proper steps, they still get ripped off the market because they're harming people. So what does that tell you about the whole process in the first place? That it's ridiculous. I mean, everybody's been up late at night and seen commercials for like, hey, you know, call our attorney's office if you had a loved one who died or got hurt by this drug or whatever. It's like, wait, I thought the whole point of having an FDA and the whole FDA approval process is so we're not guinea pigs. So we're not. Exactly. Yeah.
It's correct. I mean, look at Offit. So Offit with his rotavirus, he sits on the FDA board. Then he goes and sits over at the ACIP meetings where they, you know, put it into. I mean, that's corrupt. You know, there's people that are profiting off of this, pushing it through the FDA, pushing it through the CDC. The World Health Organization is just corrupt in its own. I mean, like, all of these organizations are not built with the people's best interests in mind. They are built with their own best interests in mind, and money and profit and greed and power. I mean, they're slowly getting exposed as well. You know, people are like, CDC keeps changing their mind about what's going on with the coronavirus. Like, wear masks, don't wear masks. But they don't have their ducks in a line, and that's why we have to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and kind of steamroll them into telling the truth, because they're flustered right now. We're on them. We're close. You know, I do feel that way.
Yeah, even like Dr. Hotez is another piece of crap that's constantly being interviewed all over the place. So, but the thing that bothers me about, and I have some mutual friends with Joe Rogan because I've had a lot of the same guests, and I'm friends with Sam Tripoli and all these guys. And so I want to believe his heart's in the right place. But I had a guest on. Her name's Chris Newby, who's a scientist, and she wrote the book Bitten about the history of Lyme disease and how it was actually possibly came from a lab and whatnot. And I remember one day I was like doing some research on some of the history of it. And I ran into a video of Joe Rogan and Frankie Edgar, who's an MMA fighter, talking about the Lyme disease vaccine and how it was taken off the market because it was actually giving people Lyme disease. People were getting hurt, and it was taken off the market. And how I don't know if it was Rogan's manager or agent, somebody close to him had personal experience with this vaccine, so he knew like no, this is dangerous, and that's why they ripped it off the market. And then I saw a short video, a clip of him talking to Dr. Hotez on his show, because he actually had that piece of crap on his show, and they were talking about the Lyme disease, and this was like a year after the first clip, and he brings it up. And Rogan's like, yeah, but he's like, wasn't it taken off the market because it was giving people Lyme disease, right? And he's like, no, it was because that rumor went around and people lost faith in it, so it wasn't profitable anymore. And Rogan's like, well, no, I know people who. I
remember that interview.
Yeah, and he's like, no, I know people who actually got Lyme disease from the vaccine. He's like, no, that can't be, this and that. And I'm just like, I feel like shaking Rogan. I'm like, listen, you just caught him in a lie. You caught him bullshitting you. So how can you believe him with any of this other conversation on this topic? Like, you have to throw away everything you thought you knew about this guy, and because you just exposed them for not being scientifically, logical and being honest. And so his intentions have to be questioned. I say the same thing about, like, I try to break it down for some people. I'm like, okay, just think about the Hep shot, right? I'm like, it's a sexually transmitted disease. You give it to, I don't know if it's a 6-month-old or a 12-month-old, but you give it within the first year of life. Like, they don't need that shot. Even if you believe they might need it later in life, they definitely don't need it when they give it to your child. So if we all agree on that, and people will be, and most people will say, yeah, you're kind of right. Like, why do they give that? I'm like, so if we can pinpoint a vaccine that's so obvious that they just add it to the schedule that's not necessary, then shouldn't you be questioning all of them and which ones are necessary, and that their intentions might be to just vaccinate the shit out of your kid and not to protect them? You know, they're not concerned about protecting them. I mean, I went to a stand-up show where the opening comedian was this like he did it kind of as a part-timer, and he was a pediatrician, and he actually joked about this during his act. He said he's like, oh, you anti-vaxxers, will you guys shut up? He's like, you don't understand. He's like, if we stop vaccinating kids, I'll be out of a job. What else are they going to come to the office for? Like, and I'm just like looking around, I'm like, yeah, like 90% of their job is just vaccinating your child. Like, they're making money off you showing up and them being able to charge your insurance. My kids go.
Yeah, you have to wonder, why do they fire? Why are they firing families, and kicking them out for not vaccinating?
I've been kicked out.
I mean, that should be a red flag in itself. I mean, why are you kicking these children out for making their own decisions? Obviously there is financial incentive. We know that for them to vaccinate, and there should never be financial incentive for any medical procedure, or there shouldn't be kickbacks for that. This is how New York got so bad. Financial incentive to put patients into the hospital, financial incentive to put them on a ventilator. Some, even the nursing homes and some of the hospitals, there was financial incentive of $10,000 for their death if they were COVID. This is why it's this very slippery slope, and people don't know this. They don't know how to navigate, this very corrupted healthcare industry that we have. They rely on, their doctors to tell them the truth. But if the doctors are brainwashed like they are and throughout school, they don't even know that they don't have the truth. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't know as a nurse. Like, I thought I'm vaccinated more than probably the majority of the population, just from being in the military as well. I got very sick after my anthrax series, but I blamed it on Iraq. So I did. That's our whole thing. We did. But I learned, and the only way that I was able to learn the truth is my own research, independent research. And how sad is that?
Are you familiar with Dr. Paul Thomas, who did the vax versus anti-vax study? Yeah, it's same thing. Like, this guy was open to, like, if you want to vax your kid, great. If you don't want to vax your kid, great. If you want to push back the vaccines, change the schedule, that's fine. And so he obviously wasn't like preventing people from being vaccinated, because he was vaccinating children if he wanted to. And this study gets him in trouble. It was just like, it was a study that proved that unvaxxed kids or partially vaxxed kids had less health issues. So without a doubt, this is it's quite obvious that they just don't want you to even get all the information to make a logical, informed decision. So so for people listening who want to support you, I know you have a book out. You obviously are not working in the medical field at the moment. How can people connect with you? How can they support you and all your social media platforms that you're on?
Yeah, so my book is Undercover Epicenter Nurse. I have like a transcripts, and it's a lot of compare and contrast with how Florida did it versus New York. You can find that at nurseerin.org for a signed copy. And then my main platform right now, I'm banned off of Facebook. That used to be, but I'm on Instagram. It's Erin_BSN. So you can find me there. And then my link tree with like the expose, other things is at Nurse Erin. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Parler's back up if you want to join Parler.
I am on Parler. It's at Nurse Erin as well. I am more active on Instagram though, but yeah, I have a presence there. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your courage and being able to be outspoken and share your story. I really appreciate it. And hopefully, we all stay active in the community and we do spark our own little ripple effect. I mean, you have already. So, I mean.
So have you. Yeah. Well, hey, we're making waves now. So, but thank you so much for having me and finally made it.
Better late than never. Yeah. Thank you, Erin. And I'll send you the links to the podcast once it's up and live, and you can share it anywhere you're not banned on.
Okay. Yeah. Be happy to.
Thanks, Erin. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Right.
Take care.
Yeah. You too. Bye. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.